Okay, thank you very much. It's good to be back on stage again with yet another group of thought leaders and very, very impressive people. We'll get right into it. So, fuel for thought, tech, climate resistance. What exactly is climate resilience, right? So if I think about climate resilience, and as an existential issue, it's about resilience to changing weather patterns, right? Extreme weather, droughts, fires, rising sea levels, crop failures, that type of thing. And that, by definition, is linked to increased political instability, general instability, failing infrastructure, climate immigration, all of these issues. And those are all inherently a security issue, right? One way or another. Now, when I think about energy transition, I think about moving towards decarbonization, for example, moving towards sustainable energies of all different kinds. What comes to mind, initially is solar, wind, right? But what about some other creative areas? I know not too popular probably in this area, but perhaps nuclear, perhaps carbon sequestration, maybe in the not too distant future, fusion, hopefully at some point. But that would be how I would define this sort of energy transition, right? So the dynamics that take place in between that are converging with other tectonic factors. And one, of course, which we can't avoid, is geopolitics, right? So, how is, for example, clean tech, the technology that we need to transition to this decarbonized environment, is that ending up in this small yard or small yard high fence environment or growing yard high fence environment that we're seeing with other technologies? I would say that the answer is yes. When we look at things like at the top of the supply chain, like rare earths, magnets, things that go into lithium batteries, and actually other areas, like semiconductors, which we briefly talked about today. All of these are connected. So it is, again, and I'm painting this picture, and hopefully we can explore this theme. I'm going to paint this picture that great power competition between the U.S. and China is, in fact, influencing the move to transition to clean energy and climate resilience more than people probably think and probably will in the future. I'm going to leave you with that as sort of a background. And I'd love to start with just a high-level question. Noguchi-san, we'll start with you on the, what would you say is the state of climate resilience today, looking around the region, given the studies that you've been doing?
All right, great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. By the way, thank you, ASPI, for inviting me. This is quite interesting 2 days. Those who read my bio, I've been to space 3 times, space station 300 days, but this is my first appearance. In that context, you guys are all Okay, back to the question. After I retired from astronaut, I have a couple of different the caps, or maybe helmets, I should say. One of them is World Economic Forum Executive Fellow, working on the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Every year we publish the report, the top 10 risks, global risk, and guess what? On the top of the the global risk is the climate issue, the severe weather risk. That's for the long term. Short term, by the way, the top is just like Maria Russa stated yesterday, the misinformation and disinformation. That's the top one. But the second, still, the climate. So most of the people around the world share the same view that we are in danger as far as the climate, the resilience goes. And this year, well, it's not just this year or last year. Every year, year by year, we are suffered by the severe weather losses. And in Japan, this year, every week we have typhoon hit, and the flooding occurs, and the bridge blown out. So we feel the sentiment that the Earth is changing, just like United Nations Antonio Guterres said, the global warming is ended, and now it's a global boiling. So we have to come up with the solutions, otherwise we are not climate resilient.
Let me just stay with you, Noguchi-san. What major investments are you seeing actually, going from the talk to the walk, if I can use that?
Talk to walk, that's good. Yeah, obviously there's a lot of the new technology flowing into this business that we call the green tech and the green finance. And the WEF, we currently forecasted we're going to have about $11 trillion, 11 trillion by 2030 in this green finance. So the money is flowing. And most of the money actually going into the mitigation side, the mitigation adaptation, just those two sides of the effort. And obviously the mitigation is heart and soul, energy transition and renewable energy. So the most of the investment goes to the mitigation. However, when you talk about the climate and the weather risks, we have to think about those adaptation side as well. Right now, about total climate finance, only 6% goes to the adaptation. The rest is mitigation. And again, that's very important. Energy transition is a heart and soul. But adaptation side, we have to come up with a good solution. Otherwise, it's about the society transition. If our society, our city infrastructure is ready to adapt to the new situation. In this case, it's a weather, extreme weather situation. So we have to come up with a good scheme, government, industry, and academia. And so maybe I can talk a little bit later, but Japan, we have to come up. We started with a new financial scheme called adaptation finance, so that the money flows in amongst those three, the government, industry, and academia.
Yep. And we'll come back to public-private partnerships, PPPs, a little bit later. Anote, you're the former president of Kiribati. I know you've had very, very direct contact with this issue, so very much looking forward to hear your response.
Thank you. Well, let me begin with a word of blessing to you all. In Kiribati, we say, "Kamnamewra," meaning may you be blessed. So let me bless you. Climate change is undeniably the biggest security threat for practically all of the Pacific Island countries, but especially for the low-lying island countries. The question is, what kind of resilience do we have? What kind of resilience can we build? Okay, let me give you a bit of background. With the low-lying island countries, the atolls, they're barely 2 meters above sea level, and that's even too high. Okay, when the tide is in, particularly the king tides, maybe we might have a couple of feet above the sea, but the rest is actually, the water is lapping, sometimes at the door. And I say this with, I have a video of what happened in March this year, where the water is actually lapping at my back door. And the same thing happened in Tuvalu, in the Marshall Islands. The seawater was actually in the homes. And there is nothing they can do. There is no resilience, because we cannot build that. When the highest point is the coconut tree, where do you go? And so this is the kind of challenge that we face in terms of the challenges to climate change. And the question as to whether we build any kind of resilience, we don't have the resources to build the kind of resilience needed to deal with the impacts today. It's overtopping the land, so it destroys our waterlands, destroys our homes and infrastructure. And so this is where we are at the moment with the impacts of climate change. This is not something in the future. And the question is, what can you do? Quite frankly, not very much. Okay. We can think about raising the islands. Yeah. There was a time when I went to Japan and I was looking at floating islands. And there were about $2 billion. We didn't have $2 billion. But I think the reality is you've got to think outside of the box on this one, in our case, because we are dealing with an unprecedented challenge that we have no way of dealing with it. What we do at the moment as a government, as people, is we build protective seawalls, and they will hold for the time being, but there are times when they will not. But I think the serious question is, what are our options for the future? And I think this is the question that I don't have an answer to. Of course, we can try building up the islands. I think I've tried to work on that. And it's going to require some huge resources.
Yeah.
Yet again, technologically, it should be possible. The question is, will we have the partners to work with in order to do that? But failing that, our final recourse might be to relocate.
Yeah.
And so these are the options that we are seriously facing into the future.
Yeah, so the quest to decarbonize and the goal of 1.5 centigrade, right, over pre-industrial levels by 2050, it's already too late for you and for the very low-lying islands. So to summarize, you can relocate, you can just pick up and go someplace else, which obviously is not a great way to live your life and to look forward to this sort of outcome. You've got your ancestry, you've got your history back there. Or you might find a partner, as you mentioned, and that's really only going to be one partner. There's only one country in the world that can build islands.
I hope not.
Right? And we'll come back to that in a little bit. Okay, so I think this is going to be a very important topic of discussion. But again, I mean, we are literally at crisis level right now with the low-lying islands. Okay, and we'll come back to those topics. Danny. Switching now to energy transition, the work you're doing at the University of New South Wales, the Energy Institute, share a little bit milestones maybe that we've been achieving, the stuff that you're working on now, what you see happening with energy transition. Again, from the talk to the walk, if I can use that term.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. It's wonderful to be on such an esteemed panel. As you say, my interest and expertise comes solely really in the energy transition space, but I think, as we know, that's 70 to 80% of the task at hand, so it feels very important to me. When we're talking about the energy transition or transformation, to me, the easiest way I can describe it in the context of your 1.5 to 2 degrees is that it's a race, and it's a race that we are not winning. So it's wonderful to hear about the level of investment that is potentially there and that is already flowing into the space, but what we're seeing in our energy transition now is that we are falling behind as we try and meet the targets that we have. So here, and I'm sure many of you have heard of our 82% renewable energy target by 2030. If we were to achieve that, we would need to be installing 22 terawatt hours of renewable generation every year. Over the past few years, we've been in the order of 7 to 9 terawatt hours per year. So we need to ramp up our efforts extremely soon, given we only have just over 5 years to achieve that particular goal. There are a number of reasons behind that pace, and I think there are a number of solutions to that, but I believe that at this point, what we cannot afford is to delay any further, and I think that's what we've seen in the past, is this, whether it may be coming from a good place of risk aversion or maybe a less good place, depending on who might be in the seat at the time. I think what we do really need to understand is that we no longer have any time to waste. And so the work that we're doing at the Institute really is to articulate both the challenge, but also articulate even more so the solutions that are available to us right here and now to implement so that we're able to meet those short, medium, long-term targets.
If I could press a little bit more on that. So in terms of the solutions, are we talking solar? Are we talking wind? What are we talking about?
And the way that we're approaching this at the Institute is a threefold approach. The first of which is, I think there's the very critical challenge of integrating variable renewable generation, which tends to be wind and solar, though that's not the only source of renewable generation. Essentially our future grid. The second of which is extremely important as well to us here in Australia, which is securing our position as a global energy powerhouse in a renewable future, because that is what we need to be working towards when we're reaching those climate goals. But thirdly as well, it's actually looking at the consumer side, the people's perspective, and supporting a consumer-led energy transition. And so here in Australia, we have a leadership position when it comes to rooftop solar PV and the integration of that. So if you look at South Australia, they are doing extraordinary things. The entire state has at times been powered by the solar on people's rooftop. And we have a lot to share, I think, with the world, but also a lot to learn.
Okay. Let me transition now a little bit more into the geopolitical context, right? So if we're going to be adding a lot of solar, a lot of wind, the supply chains for that are dominated by China, right? So what efforts are being made to diversify the production? I think you had mentioned that it's Australian technology, but it's actually the hardware, the stuff that's being manufactured is Chinese, basically. It's coming from China. What is happening in that sphere in terms of efforts to diversify, to look to try and move things around, to reorganize, if you will, and to restructure supply chains?
And this is an area that we've looked at quite recently and very closely because, as you say, the technology that sits within the modern solar panel is invented at the University of New South Wales by Professor Martin Green's team. And that team has grown over time to continue to be at the forefront of solar PV innovation. We were tasked by the Renewable Energy Agency to look at whether Australia could have a role to play in the solar manufacturing supply chain and published a report called the Silicon to Solar Study. And looking at that closely, we strongly believe that we can be involved in this diversification effort. And I think that it's also critical that we are able to supply into that global market, because what we're seeing here is that all of our decarbonisation efforts are underpinned by renewable energy. And so there's not going to be enough solar to go around, and there is enormous opportunity to participate in that supply chain. And so having done that analysis, we are quite confident that we can have a role to play in solar manufacturing, and I can go into detail if you'd like, but I'll make sure that there's a question on that before I do. But also, it's important, as you said, noting that, I guess we have significant relationships with not just our technology that we've invented here in Australia, but also the people that have come to learn from us and have gone back and are now in those companies and keen to collaborate.
And that's another very touchy subject, isn't it, in terms of percentages of students from different countries coming to Western universities, right? A chapter in my book, Techno-Nationalism, a very tough one, but yes. Noguchi-san, in terms of technology, in terms of investment, where are you seeing the good money going?
Good money going. Well, for the technology, go back to the original, the theme of this session. It was tech and climate resilience. How can the technology help the climate to being resilient? We have a couple of the efforts around going on. And by the way, Alex, I like your analogy. The talk to walk. And the phrase we often use in this technology side is, visualize, analyze, and realize. So the first thing is visualize, because if you cannot see it, you cannot fix it. So the first step is obviously what's going on climate-wise. What's the recent change? What's the global boiling due to the nature? So where that's come from, where those technology come from is there's a lot of different technology used, but one of them is actually come from space, the satellite. The satellite data help a lot to understand the climate change. The recent days, we are using a particular satellite called the SAR, that's synthetic aperture radar, which is pretty good to visualize the climate change. Number one, you can see through the clouds. When you're orbiting around Earth for 344 days, one thing you realize is the Earth is covered by clouds most of the time, especially the winter Europe and also the summer Asia. It's already covered by the clouds, so you cannot see. The SAR satellite, the synthetic aperture radar, can see through the clouds and very good at detecting the surface change, meaning the surface is covered by artificial ground or the concrete or water. So it means like flooding, the SAR satellites quickly analyze how much in the area is covered by the water. The other side is actually very good at detecting the marine, the sea traffic. So that's what this SAR satellites go into the dual use, military and the civilian. But I want to talk about that. But the SAR is very latest and greatest technology. And the good thing about technology is many people starting to use it, the cost goes down dramatically. It's talk about 10 times, 100 times lower compared to like 10 years ago. So those satellite data helps us understand the current situation. And then we come to the analyze side, obviously AI. Everybody talking about AI, but the climate technology use AI. NEC is our industrial partner. They have their own AI system to use the satellite data and the ground-based data to come up with a solution. And AI tell us a couple of different solutions. One good example is agri-tech, agriculture, to help the farmers to come up with a good solution for how often they put the fertilizer and the water into their land. So those are the packages that we're working on. Solution is visualize first, then analyze, and realize is, of course, we do it according to the analysis of AI and the good help of a financial scheme, which I described earlier in the day.
Yes. So the data is there, the picture is there, the visualization is there. You can measure it now.
Right.
Now it really comes down to managing it.
Right, and in between there's a AI. So we have to interpret and come up with a solution, and AI is a very good solution.
So there's a positive twist on the future of AI,
Hopefully,
right?
yes.
The application that we could put it to for obviously climate resilience. Anote, if I could ask you, maybe shifting a little bit, again, your time in politics, and now you're very active in all of the Pacific when it comes to the islands and this issue. From a public-private partnership perspective, what are you seeing in terms of governments working with the private sector and other elements of the certainly academia? Any traction there? Are there any success stories to be reported? Where do you see that going, or what needs to be done?
I'm going to be a politician. And politicians don't always answer the question they're asked. So let me redirect that. And if I may make a couple of points, okay? I'm listening to all the technology, okay? We must be dealing with the climate change and the challenges that people are facing on this planet, okay? Particularly in the most vulnerable countries. I'm hearing about Australia doing a wonderful job in transitioning. But what we need Australia to do is to transition away from the fossil fuel industry, okay? Rather than continuing to invest or subsidizing the fossil fuel industry to the tune of $11 to $17 billion annually. You're talking about investments. Why don't we redirect that to the renewables? That is a serious question. Okay, and of course, the other question is in terms of an investment. Okay, are we really trying to solve this problem? When the funds are still flowing to the fossil fuel industry to keep exploring, to keep drilling, and what have you. But I think we should be, all of that money should be going to the kind of work that these, the technical people are doing in trying to find the solutions. If we could stop this, I mean, why are we trying to build resilience while some others are actively destroying it? Every time that we are, people are investing in the fossil fuel industry, they are destroying any kind of resilience that we might be trying to build. And so it's a futile process. So let's deal with it at the root of the cause of the problem, okay? Of course, in time, I don't know how much time, for us, we're out of time, okay? As far back as the Fourth Assessment Report, it was estimated that small, low-lying island countries have, to the end of the century, The sixth assessment report, which came out in 2022, says, no, you don't have the end of the century. You've got until 2060. But all those are regarded as being conservative, so we may actually have less. And so the question that is before us is, what to those that have no way of withstanding this, what do they do? The international progress has been, this futile attempt at trying to cut emissions, which we haven't succeeded in doing. We are now 1.45 degrees centigrade. So we are, I'm a member of the Climate Overshoot Commission, and they're talking about geoengineering, okay? But where are we really heading? In my view, unless we can take some drastic steps to cut the production of fossil fuels, we are heading towards disaster, off the edge. And so I think these are the issues that we need to tackle. I think Danny said, we may be too late already. We are running out of time. So I think we need to put a lot more emphasis in not in pushing governments, but the governments may not always be in control. It's probably the fossil fuel industry that is controlling the governments. So let's deal with that, rather than to continue to what, I drew the analogy. Somebody keeps shooting the bullets while we try to find ways building our resilience by dodging it. Let's stop the bullets coming.
Okay. So that's a pretty bleak sort of message coming out of the panel here, and that is that it's late in the game, we're beyond the penultimate hour, and we're not moving quickly enough. And so we have two scenarios. One is it's already in crisis mode if you're in a low-lying island. If we're looking to be preemptive, if we're looking to reach the Paris Accords goals by 2050, we need to be doing a lot more. So Danny, from a PPP perspective, where do we need to go? What needs to be done then? How do we step this up?
I think that, and you're saying these public-private partnerships working together across industry, government, academia is so critical, and I would fully agree with that as a goal. I do also think that it's really important to move forward regardless of if you don't have consensus across all of those groups. I think, again, if we are this late in the game, we must move forward. Everyone who is on board must get the train moving. But we will always move faster if we come together. And I think what we've seen in the recent history in Australia is a changing of the tide, which has been very exciting, particularly for us in the energy transition space, to be able to, instead of maybe in some cases having to justify our existence and the work that we do, we are now being asked the question of, okay, well then, how are you going to do it? And having to shift our focus in that way. And take that opportunity with both hands and make the most of it. And I think from my point of view in academia, where I have seen the partnerships work best is when everyone is holding that opportunity with both hands.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Let me shift to realpolitik now in the context of climate change. So we've seen in the really strategic technologies like semiconductors, like quantum, let's call it a hybrid Cold War between the US and China is accelerating innovation, right? It's concentrating that innovation to very, very distinct hubs. We're seeing a bifurcation, a reorganization. So how does a country like Kiribati leverage that reality? So let me give you an example. I don't know if it's come to fruition yet, but China is basically been slated to build islands, right, in the future, correct me if I'm wrong, if it's not already happening, in Kiribati. That is buying them incredible influence. It's expanding their geopolitical footprint. They are, in fact, building up or restoring an airstrip in the Phoenix Islands on Canton Island, which used to be used, it goes all the way back to Pan American Airways on its transcontinental flights, down to Australia. It was used by the yes, it was used by the U.S. military. The U.S. military apparently has just walked away from this. The Chinese have stepped in. How does a country like Kiribati use this great power competition to get the G7 countries, to get the attention of Australia, to get them to step in and start building and start doing this stuff, right? It's an infrastructure competition. Is that a viable approach for these low island states?
I'm well aware of what's going, but somebody asked me, what do you think about this competition? I said, it's damn good, let them compete. And but of course, I think at the heart of all of this, it's about the Kiribati people. It's not about China or the U.S. I think that is. They may be involved in that, but I think as leaders, as a Pacific leader, we must be thinking about our own people. And if in the process of trying to protect our people, we get these superpowers to compete, good, wonderful. Of course, China has been building islands, but they're sinking, okay? And that's South China Sea. So I'll be hesitant to get the Chinese to do it. Maybe they can do it better, but I think, quite frankly, the technology is available. I think it's just a matter of mobilizing the resources. There was a time when I was seriously looking at it, and I needed support, partners, design, and but again, it's about options. At the end of my term, I'd come to the conclusion that we don't have an option, but in order to, we must continue to have a homeland. Yeah. And so we need to build, if only one or two islands. We cannot raise up all of the islands because we would never mobilize the resources to do that. But at least we have a home. And I think that can be done. The question is, who will have the resources and who would be willing with the technology to do it? If China is willing, well, China, if China does it, of course, China would have captured the hearts of the people in Kiribati, okay? And, but of course, now I don't know if Australia listening to this, it's something that I've always thought about. If the Chinese want to capture the region, the two remaining countries that have not established relations with China, that's Tuvalu and the Marshall Islands, okay? These two are in the same situation as we are, the most vulnerable. And so the question will be, if tomorrow China goes and offers to rebuild the islands, will they switch? But don't tell the Chinese, because if they hear this, they will do that. Okay? But here again, this is where maybe Australia has failed, Japan, the United States. If we are the partners that they want us to be, then do something meaningful for us. And that it's an offer we can never refuse.
Thank you. Noguchi-san.
Can I add?
Please.
Obviously, Alex, you're right. The theme of this session, obviously, the climate crisis eventually lead to the national security issue. And talk about, of course, the first thing is obviously people in the Kiribati, but if you think about those Kiribati, Marshall Islands, and Tonga, yesterday we heard from Minister of Tonga about their subsea cable. It's areas, if you look at the global network, it's a crossroad of all the internet goes through those areas. So it has a huge importance for the information security. And if you talk about the energy transition, the EV, the electric vehicle, of course it's good to switch to the electric vehicle, but most of the battery come from China, and they obviously obtain most of those rare metals. So we don't have enough, the rare metals and come up with the battery material to come up with the number we require to do the energy transition. So climate issue is one thing, but it's eventually lead to the national and economical security issue.
And I would agree with that as well. And it's definitely something that we're considering at the Institute as well. I think in the context of Australia, we've heard a lot about the Future Made in Australia policy, which is incentivising, I guess, local manufacturing again in relation to, in many cases, the net zero transformation. I think it's quite clear to us at the Institute that this is not just industrial policy as it once was. This is now a convergence of what we're seeing in terms of climate energy security and national security policy all in one. And I think it's very important in this time that we consider it holistically and take stock of where we are at and where we would like to be. And again, as I said I think at the outset, focus on the relationships that we have and deep diplomacy in this transformation.
Thank you, Danny. Noguchi-san, I have to ask you, again, looking at this more from the finance side, right? The role of, for example, sovereign wealth funds, the role of large, international banks, et cetera. Is it enough? Do they need to step up, and do they need to be prodded more by governments? What needs to happen there?
Yeah, thanks. Obviously, all the financial institutions around the world have to step up to come up with a good solution. Right now, we don't. Of course, the financial funding-wise, the money is there, but we don't have enough the technology to persuade. Hey, this is a great thing or the right thing to do to prevent this like a natural disaster based on the climate change. So that's why we come up with the new consortium, the scheme, so that right now we talk about the government, industry, and academia, but industry includes the insurance company, banking, and the building company as well. So the general consortium. So those people have to agree that that this is the right way to analyze and forecast the possible damage based on the current climate change, and then come up with a good solution, the preventative maintenance, and then put the money onto it. So right now we don't have a good scheme yet, but we're moving toward it. And the good example is actually Japan. We have a lot of earthquake. For the earthquake, you cannot predict the earthquake, but we can fairly guesstimate the damage if the earthquake occurs here and there at a certain time. So we can fairly clearly define how much money needed if the earthquake hit this region, so that we can do the preventative maintenance way before it actually hits. So that's the way we come up with the solution. And we don't have that in the climate side yet. So because we think the forecasting level is not there. But we're trying.
Excellent. Okay, in the final 3.5 minutes or so, if I could ask each panelist maybe to take 1 minute and say, what is the single most important thing that needs to happen now for us to improve our climate resistance posture from your unique perspectives? Anote, starting with you.
Well, I think it's very clear. Why the problem, we know the cause. Why don't we, stop the production of fossil fuel? But of course, it must be done hand in hand with finding alternative sources of energy.
Should fossil fuel companies, really quickly, should they be involved in island building? Should they be funding that?
Well, definitely.
Yes or no?
Definitely the US.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Noguchi-san?
Thank you. For the climate resilience, there's 2 ways: mitigation, application. For mitigation, you're right. Energy transition is heart and soul. We have to do the energy transition. And for the adaptation, we have to come up with the good solution. And I believe after all things said and done, I still believe technology, including AI, can help us improve our society.
Okay. Danny?
And in the context of the energy transition, the way I see it is that we're on the cusp of an enormous build out of infrastructure. And so reflecting on the technology and climate resilience of that potential infrastructure, we often talk about building back better, but I just feel as though
Sounds like a Biden administration.
We've heard that before, but it feels at the outset of a future infrastructure development, we should be building better to begin with.
Yeah, which is really the PGII, right? That took its language from the Biden administration. So it makes sense. G7, strong partnerships. Friendshoring, right? Potentially, if semiconductors are friendshoring, if other areas are friendshoring, does that happen again in circular economies and clean tech that does have export control pressures and that sort of thing. Okay, I think we can go to Q&A now, and we actually finished 1 minute. We got an extra minute to go, so we'll shift to Q&A. And I'll put my glasses on. There's a question up front right here in the table, first table. Another one, another couple in the back there.
Yeah, look, thank you.
Yeah.
This is a security conference, and it's very important to frame things up with, some baseline reality. The sales of coal, oil, and gas continue to rise strongly globally. That's the reality, point one. Point two is, in that context, if we're only spending 6% on mitigation, on adaptation, perhaps can I say to you, as somebody deeply invested in agricultural research and feeding the people, we'd better do a darn sight better, particularly in Australia, because nothing we do, as our chief scientist has confirmed, is going to make much difference. Secondly, can I just say, in terms of security, if that's our concern, I have to say I think we need to grapple with the reality that the energy transition in this country is not progressing well. Power prices are up 60%. Our manufacturing base, which I think we'd all agree is critically important to security, is being badly damaged. We're now looking at the very real probability of unreliable and unpriceable power in coming years. What are the security implications of some of these hard realities? And there's another blunt one for this country. Our income, and we are in a time of declining national income, particularly on a per capita basis, is heavily dependent upon those exports. With great respect to another former politician, we don't subsidise our fossil fuel energies. We do subsidise our renewable energy. And I just make the other point that while the world is using more and more of these resources, I would have thought our gas is a good substitute for dirty coal in other parts of the world. And I would have thought that higher kilojoule, higher energy coal is also a good thing to supply if you're serious about reducing the global footprint. So I'm afraid I want to challenge quite a bit of what was said here today and ask the hard questions. Where does national security fit with the reality that the energy transition is not going well and it is damaging our economy?
That's a tough, hard question. Noguchi-san, I'll start with you.
With all due respect, sir, you're correctly right. Yeah, you're talking about energy transition. Yeah, of course, that the country which builds the most number of electric vehicle, they're also building a new coal-based power plant every 2 weeks. So what is good for the world, the climate? So we have, obviously you have to attack on those the coal, the energy transition first, and demolish all the coal-based plant. But obviously it takes a long time. It takes a long time.
If we had more time, I'd like to weigh in on that one,
Right.
but as the moderator, I won't. But I think we had another question in the back there.
Hello, I'm Hayley Chan. I work for the US Study Centre at Sydney Uni. I had a question for Danny on solar technology, and you also mentioned future made in Australia. Speaking with industry, there's a lot of mixed views on the government's investment in solar panels and a lot of confusion around why the government's spending taxpayer money on solar. Are you able to talk a bit more about the solar technology, what's on the horizon, and if we're doing something better and more innovative than China? And if we are, can China take that technology? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I do think that there's been quite a lot of public conversation on this topic, which is why I was keen to talk about it a little bit today. Again, I direct for more detail to the silicon to solar study that has been published and has a very good reference base. But I think what it had found is that there is a role for Australia to play, but I think perhaps it's been misconstrued in the media at times of where that role is likely to be in the future. So I think there's a lot of focus on module manufacture, and I think there is a point at which we need to invest there, so there is some pull there, but largely where we're looking at the opportunity in the long term from Australia is earlier on in the supply chain. So say polysilicon is an enormous opportunity for us, given that we have the resources and we have the skills base to be able to play a significant role there. I do think, again, that we have very strong relationships internationally when it comes to the technology that we develop here in Australia, and we are at the forefront. But again, we shouldn't be starting at the ground floor. We should be starting at the very best technology, and I think that's where we are seeing those who are at the forefront of technology very keen to play, is to develop that innovation space here in Australia, just making sure that we have enough play in the supply chain so it has somewhere to go.
Okay, and I think we're going to have to end it there. So thank you very much, Anote, Noguchi-san, Danny. Thank you very much. Thank you, audience, for the question.